we are going to change tactics after this week, so just a couple more classes, and then we will. I haven't quite figured out exactly what I'm going to do, but I think I'm going to kind of try to release a video or something every day around 3 o'clock or something, kind of to coordinate with pre-meal as we get back, hopefully, to a little bit more of a normal kind of schedule in the restaurants and whatnot. It's going to take a while, but once we get to the 17th, we have in Connecticut, we have the ability to open up inside as well as outside. If you haven't seen some of the adjustments, Oyster Bar, there was a picture in the paper this morning. Might actually be able to find that, but they moved into their outside space, and they now have, I think it's about 10 seats. I don't know where this would, I don't know where I saw this, but find it that easy. But we have made moves to add on as much outside space as possible. So we are definitely expanding the table offerings as much as possible. Burger, if you haven't been over to West Hartford, they have added a whole outside patio area, kind of more or less doubling the size of their patio. And Long Meadow opened up this week, outside, of course, and they have been doing well. Tavern's not quite there yet. They're in the process of redoing their kitchen. I think tomorrow, maybe. I'm not sure. I haven't heard anything today. But there's there's promise. So we're working on it. We're moving ahead as best as we can, and it is what it is for the moment. So we're going to continue on. One stab at trying to find a picture of this, and that's not going to work. So I can't find it real quick. I don't know. I saw it. My wife actually pulled it up this morning on a news feed or something she was looking at, but looks pretty good. So West Hartford has added a bunch of seating outside, taking up parking spaces basically along Farmington Avenue and LaSalle. And we've been able to take advantage of that to kind of improve and increase our seating capacity. Max Fish actually took the unused patio at Amore and has been using that for added seating. So they've got a bunch of seats there. So we're doing whatever we can to kind of move ahead. We've got new guidelines and new restrictions in Massachusetts and other places that we're incorporating into our normal kind of guideline book or guidebook that we established about 3 or 4 weeks ago when we started to reopen. And so, any feedback from you guys, if anybody's out there that happens to be working or noticing things, is appreciated. So let me know. But today what we're going to do is kind of continue on, kind of like what I did yesterday with beer. But first, I did shoot a couple short videos, put them together. It's only a minute and a half. But this is a small compilation video on service and hospitality. Let me drag it over. Get rid of this.
You ask me the question and then I can answer you.
Yeah, what's your number one rule for great service? Let's start that over. For some reason, YouTube likes to just play. Get the volume up. All right.
You ask me the question and then I can answer you.
Yeah, what's your number one rule for great service and hospitality? You're coaching the new server. What are you going to tell them?
To be observant and to be able to triage their guests when they're walking in, to be able to anticipate their needs and know what kind of guest they might be, and to be able to pay attention to detail so that the presentation is always on point.
My number one rule on hospitality is to smile at all times. When you're answering the phone, when you first greet a guest, when you greet your coworkers, the smile is infectious, and no matter how down somebody is, if you smile at them, answer the phone, greet them with a smile, they can see it in your eyes, they can hear it in your voice. A smile is the beginning. My number one rule on service is to do everything you can to help each other out, no matter if it's a tiny job to help somebody else out, or if it's something that's out of your normal duties, as long as it's helping somebody else out. That we're all working together, rowing in the same direction, and everybody can achieve the same goal.
What are you going to tell me as a new manager?
to be personable and to have fun with it, because we all just like to have fun while working.
That's great. My biggest advice to any new manager would be to say hi to every single person in the restaurant every single day. It's the best way to build a connection with somebody, get to know your team, and know what everybody's capable of.
No, we do not want that. All right. Go back to the presentation. So just to kind of follow that up, the points there, smile, pay attention to detail, participate in a team effort whenever you're in the restaurant, be personable and have fun in the job. It sucks when somebody's down, I guess. And well, I know. And then say hi to everyone. You know, eye contact and greeting everybody, whether they're your associates or their guests, is really important. So just wanted to kind of emphasize that. I'll continue on with those little short clips of sage advice from our management team as we go forward. But they love to get cornered and have me actually ask them questions. It's fun. Anyways, so today we're going to go over basically continue with Beer Week. We're going to do pale ales in the lighter side of the ale world. It's probably going to be a relatively short and painless meeting. And then we'll watch a quick video that kind of ties it a little bit together at the end. So let's kind of get into it here. So what exactly is pale ale? Pale ales, got that thing acting up again. Pale ales are warm fermented or top fermented beers, usually made with lighter, paler malts that often have a little bit lighter color and don't display as much overt maltiness on the palate. You know, there's a big spectrum here of styles, which we're going to go through. So you might see beers, and I put this picture up for a purpose. You might see pales that are very light, golden in color, all the way up to deep, rich red and brown. So these are the ones that kind of run the spectrum of the ale world, kind of on the lighter and less malty and more delicate kind of side. And there is a wide variety of these. So some of the traditional or original pale ales would not have been as hoppy. And then of course you do, and I'm not really talking about IPAs today, even though that's technically a pale ale. I'm going to kind of handle that on its own. But this goes all the way up to the classic pale ale, which is generally going to be a little less hoppy, not quite as intense, a little bit more smooth, slightly bitter characteristics, but not as intense. But we're going to get into each of the categories as we go. There often will be a little bit of hops, but as I said, not quite as intense as the IPAs. American versions, though, tend to show that hop character a little bit more forward, and I would always steer you towards Brutus Maximus as a classic example of an American pale ale. I kind of will talk about how I developed it in a little while, but you know, Brutus is, in my opinion, kind of hits the middle spot between what the English pale ales and the American pale ales really should be to kind of create a well-balanced and pretty favorable style of beer. So what exactly is a pale ale from a category? What are the categories that we're talking about? We're going to talk about ambers and French ombres, Bière de Garde, saisons, golden and blonde ales, sort of the classic three pale ale categories from Belgium, or the Belgian style, English and American, and then also red ales, which are sort of an offshoot from the Irish, but it's also made here in the US. So a little bit of history behind pale ale. That is actually my computer advancing itself on its own. I don't know why it does that. The term pale ale was first used in the early 1700s. I think actually the date is around 1703 when the Burton-on-Trent brewery it's actually in sort of central western England, had kind of perfected a style of production that relied on using coke, which is a derivative of coal, to roast their malts. And what it really allowed them to do was have better control over their roasting in their kilns and control the roast of the malts. Prior to that, he basically started a big fire with wood. It burned hot, but then went cold because the fire burns out quick. And so you had to roast quickly, and a lot of times you would get these really deep roasted to even burnt styles. And so the classic English beers often were darker, more porter-like, and had a smokiness to them. Once they kind of figured out how to kind of control this a little bit with better techniques, the roasting of the malts became an art form, essentially, and you ended up with a lot of variety of these fresh ales that were a little bit different. Now, keep in mind, back in the 1700s, they didn't have refrigeration. These beers would have been put into casks, and they would be what we call today real ales, meaning they were basically cask conditioned, lower in their carbonation. They would have been served out of a hand pump that if you go into pubs in England today, you'll still see them, and occasionally you see them here in the U.S. But the real ales are definitely a different breed of beers. They're alive, they're yeasty, and they're great. So kind of what resulted back in the day here were these paler beers, what often are called bitters in England, and it kind of just depends on the style, which we'll go through a little bit. And they were definitely different than the milds, which don't really have any bitterness from hops to them. Browns, porters, and stouts, which are darker and richer and maltier. All right, so let's go through the categories. Did I miss a slide? Yes, I did. History, amber. All right, so just to kind of go through these real quick, some of the categories, or the general categories, are going to include amber. Amber is kind of almost like the classic American ale, although it's a term that's used all over the place. And there's a good amount of crystal malt in here. And crystal is basically just when the malt sugars are starting to be caramelized and turned into crystals, although they're not roasted very heavily. And you get this kind of amber copper kind of color, which I think is represented over here pretty well with this beer glass on the side. Bell's is a very classic example of that. Sometimes there's other malts, and depending on where it comes from, you're going to have different styles. Typically in America, we're going to use a little bit more hops, which are going to exude a little bit more fruitiness and whatnot, but these are generally beers that are not overly hopped. You're looking for kind of that smooth maltiness, easy drinkability, and kind of fresh style to them. So they're a little bit different. We don't see too much of this French ambre, but just kind of keep in mind that they can either be ales or lagers. This Fischer Amber is a absolutely delicious beer. So if you're ever to have it, or see it, just note that. And so some classic examples here in the U.S.: Trogues Hopback Amber Ale, Deschutes, which we don't really get here, and Pyramid. Anderson Valley Boot Amber Ale, which we do sometimes have, and then the Bell's Amber, which is available to us. So just down here on the bottom, some of the vital statistics that are important. This IBUs, International Bittering Units. This is 25 to 40 is typically the range for ambers. That's on a scale of 1 to 100, so you have some bitterness, but not too much. Alcohol content is about 4.5 to 6.2. This SRM is actually a color reflection, and so it's relatively low here in its density, so you get a little bit of color reflection, but it's not too dark. So that's kind of the, we'll go through these a little bit as you see these numbers, or you see these beers in these slides, and just have a little bit of comparison. So the ones that are important really are the alcohol and the IBUs. So relatively low in the IBU scale, and mild on the alcohol side. Bière de Garde, this is a whole category unto itself, and essentially means keeping the beer or aging the beer. These are artisanal pale ales that come from a specific place in France, but you also find them in Belgium, you find them in the United States, and kind of would be considered farmhouse ales. These are beers that would have been produced in the latter part of winter and early spring when there wasn't much going on for farmers, and they would have been consumed later on. The origin of the name lies in the tradition that it was cellared for a period of time once it was bottled to be consumed, usually more in the fall. So they would be aged over the summer. They actually would produce other beers, which we'll talk about, like a saisons. They would produce after these and drink them through the summer while waiting for these beers to kind of come about. There's no real exact definition of these, like there isn't for saison, but these are typically going to be richer, maltier, and they are beers that are aged, and often aged in the champagne style bottle under cork and with a sediment. So they have a lot of nutritional value, and they're quite intense. IBUs relatively low here, 18 to 28, because they're not using a lot of hops. They just weren't available in northern France traditionally, and so the beer, especially in the late winter when it was not growing season, And so it would have relied much more on the malt and the blend of the malt to get to the flavor and be intriguing. Alcohol, typically a little bit higher. This isn't super, super high, but a little bit higher than like a session style beer, 6 to 8, 8.5. But again, these are beers that would have been consumed probably 6 months after they were made, or more, and had a chance to age. So some classic examples. I think the one you probably see the most is Trois Malt, and Brasserie Le Choulette Ambre is another one. But Ommegang produces their bigger and breader kind of style sometimes. I think this is a brewery only beer, but it's kind of an interesting one-off. But you get these beers that are designed to be aged. Saison, we kind of covered this a little bit yesterday. Saisons is a style of beer that typically would have been brewed in the spring and then consumed over the summer, relatively lower in alcohol. You can see ABV here is 5 to 7. That's on the new beer, or the beers that you have today. I would say Saisons typically often are going to be around 3.5 to 4.5% alcohol. True Saisons or farmhouse beers. These beers would have been kept and drunk over the summer. They just would have been a little bit lighter than those bearded guards that we had just a second ago, and just absolutely delicious, clean classic ales that are really refreshing to drink. Sometimes they would have actually, because these are produced kind of closer to in northern France or actually in Belgium, there would have been the tradition of putting some flavorings in here, some spices or some other things, just to kind of make them a little bit different. So every farmer, every producer would have actually had their own kind of version of this, and so that's why it's so hard to kind of pin it down as a style. Simply because there is no style. It's kind of within a framework of production, but Saisons kind of are basically this slightly lighter style beer that have some sort of spicing or flavoring to them, usually not very hoppy, and have these days, if they come in a bottle conditioned style like the Saison du Pont does in this champagne style bottle, then they're going to be pretty they're going to have a good amount of carbonation to them, being bottle conditioned. And always remember to kind of give it a pour out about 3/4 of the bottle, give it a little swirl to get that yeast sediment at the bottom, and then fill that into the glass, because that's always delicious. So Saison du Pont is it's considered to be the pinnacle of this style of beer. IBUs down the bottom here, you can see, are only 25 to 35, so a little bit of bitterness, often coming from some of these other spices that may have been added, and just a moderate amount of alcohol, but very light, very clean, very easy drinking styles of beer. Lost Abbey, if you ever get a chance to try some Lost Abbey beers from California, these are great. Ommegang Hennepin you can certainly find around here, and sometimes we sell it. All right, blonde ales, very common beer. In fact, when I was Googling for pictures, one of the first ones that come up was Thomas Hooker's Blonde Ale. These are easy drinking, very light, not using malts that have been roasted very heavily. So just sort of the classic example of a pale ale, but on the very lighter side. Typically going to have a little bit more fruit flavor to them, because the malt is not so dominant in the beer. And so the fruity esters that come out from the brewing process, from fermentation with the yeast, really kind of help drive these. So light, fruity, easy drinking, perfect beers. A lot of times brewers will actually make blonde ales and sell them as summer beers, because they are so light and refreshing and easy to drink. Typically could have a little bit more hoppiness to them, but usually not too heavy. And these are just great drinks. They're really designed to kind of compete with the lagers that are so prevalent out there, but in that little bit more fruity, softer style that ale presents, rather than the crisp snap style of the lagers. Golden ales. So there's a little bit of a overflow here. Sometimes people think that golden ales and blondes are kind of the same. I've always separated them. I've always thought that they were a little bit different. To me, the golden ale just has a little bit more richness, a little bit more fullness to it. But it's hard to tell, because each producer may kind of do their own thing. That's a little bit of an overlap. You do, I find, get a little bit more hoppiness in these golden ales. They are They are, well balanced. Again, easy drinking. Sometimes very similar to those blonde ales that I just talked about. Relatively low in alcohol, so kind of fits into the session style beers. This is kind of an interesting fact that I found in the UK. This style of beer is attributed to John Gilbert, owner of Hopback Brewery, who developed Summer Lightning in the late 80s, and he won some awards. So relatively new kind of style, sort of differentiating itself from some of these other lighter ales. I think in Belgium, the blonde ale was probably a little bit more popular and classic going back about 100 years. But they would have actually used Pilsner malts, which are a little bit cleaner and lighter. They're not so roasted, and so you don't end up with the more kind of rich or darker amber malty kind of flavors. So kind of clean and classic. Belgian blondes are just refreshing. They actually end up often being a little bit higher in alcohol, but are really kind of great, refreshing summer type drinks. And so we talked about Duvel yesterday. It's basically a strong ale, kind of considered to be basically the Belgian example there. So I'm a big fan of that Duvel, and it's delicious. Whether you want to call it a golden ale or a blonde ale, I always refer to it as a Belgian pale, but it is definitely worth seeking out if you're a beer fan. Mayflower we do have, and Kona we do have sometimes. Mayflower, I've never had their golden ale, but I'd be intrigued to try that because they're a pretty good producer. Kona is a nice producer, a little bit more mainstream, but they make very nice beers. So pale ale, the classic pale ale. This category kind of overlaps and depends on where you're taking your tradition of brewing from. And we kind of divide it into the three sort of classic brewing worlds of Belgium, England, and the Americas. And so that's what we're going to kind of focus on next. But pale ale is, again, it's not something that's easily pinned down unless you kind of have context of where that beer style is maybe trying to emulate. And I reference Brutus a lot, and Brutus kind of takes its, for me, when I was helping to establish the recipe and the style of Brutus, it really was kind of, I was going back and referencing a couple beer styles, which we'll talk about in a second, one of which was more in that English tradition. And it's kind of follows suit, I think, and has held steady pretty much all along. So we'll start with Belgium. These beers actually go back many, many years because they just would have been natural fermentation. We talked about this yesterday. The Belgians have a really good long history of brewing, particularly within the monasteries and the Trappist beers and whatnot. But they also overlap into France. Flemish is kind of the Belgian side, the side of Belgium that kind of runs kind of towards France, and so there's an overlap here because borders and boundaries did shift throughout history, but northern France into Belgium, into the Netherlands, and even northern Germany, they all kind of share some of these same kind of styles. But the very classic pale ale sort of came about with the fact that there were a lot of British who had been stationed during World War I and then World War II in the area, and they were favorable to this style. So whether it was shipped over from England as supply chain, or it was actually brewed in place, the British kind of contributed a little bit to the popularity, more modern popularity of Belgian pale ales. And here's the Grimbergen, which is a delicious example of it. And I put these two up here because you've got kind of like the two different color versions. Again, there's a wide range here. These tend to be pretty good beers, and they are often more of what we would kind of consider to be the session style beers. They don't typically have the intense hoppiness, certainly the intense hoppiness you're going to get out of American pale ales, but they do have a little bit of hoppiness, but it's going to be because their malts and their hops come more from southern Germany and places like that. Their traditions tend to follow along a little bit more of like the comparison to a Pilsner, which is kind of a full-bodied lager with a little bit of bittering hops. So these Belgian pale ales tend to be not so overt and fruity, a little bit more reserved, a little bit more bitter, and just clean and easy to drink. Medium light in body, alcohol levels restrained, and warming character should be low if it's present, which is the alcohol content. All right, so pretty cool beers. We don't see a ton of them here, but they definitely warrant the place. English pale ales, on the other hand, have a long tradition. And I particularly am a large fan of these because I tend to like a little less hop influence, a little bit cleaner kind of style. I always have. So the traditional British Pale Ale or English style Pale Ales include bitters and ESBs, which I'll talk about in just a second. ESB stands for extra special bitter. There's just an easeability to these beers, and you got to remember the English pint is actually bigger than the American pint. It's closer, it's just under 20 ounces. And so the British often favor moderate alcohol content, such as 4.5, which is what we would kind of consider to be session beers. I think because craft brewing over the last 10 years has gotten so used to producing beers that were 6, 6.5, 7, 8, 9, 10. But they tend to be a little intense. So the classic English pale ales are definitely going to be a little bit easier. They're going to be a little less alcohol intense, and so you can drink a big old pint or two and not get crashed. I will tell you, I was in England many years ago. It was after college, and I was in a pub, and I was talking to guys, and you know, we had a great time and everything, and we went to we were staying there. It was basically a bed and breakfast kind of thing, and we got up the next morning, and I was like, man, those guys, they didn't really, you know, I was drinking some beers, and they didn't seem like they were getting so drunk. And my girlfriend is now my wife. She's like, yeah, because they were all drinking shandies and you were drinking full pints. It was like, they didn't tell me. So they kind of like, you know, they had silly American and they got him to drink full pints of beer. So while they were all drinking half lemonades. So just a note, shandy, kind of a good extension for the summertime. If you have the opportunity, if somebody's looking for something that's a little lower in alcohol, a little bit more refreshing. The English bitter or pale ale mixed 50-50 with lemonade is kind of that classic shandy, and we do offer that. You can do it with Brutus, in fact, and it creates kind of a nice offering. So if you're working and talking to guests about something maybe a little bit different, I'll keep the shandy in the back of your minds. So IBUs here, 20 to 40, again, kind of on the mild side. It's not until you get to the India Pale Ales and the American Pale Ales that you're going to really kind of start to see these beers jump up. And usually just a light copper color, which is great. So when I talk about Brutus and I talk about kind of where I go back to kind of think about what I want it to taste like and the style and the inspiration, it actually goes to Bass in one respect, because when I was high school, college, I used to like to drink Bass Pale Ale. I found that it was a style of beer that I liked. At the time, it was still relatively close to its original production. Wasn't sort of like, it's kind of gotten a little weak these days. It's not what it used to be 30 years ago. The Bass Pale Ale back in the day was just an easy drinking, slightly bitter, slightly hoppy style of beer, which it kind of still is. So that's where I took my inspiration. But this is an old beer company going back many, many years. I found this poster well known in 1778 and world famous in 1911. So obviously a poster from a long time ago. So English bitters. This is kind of a funny term because it's something that the British have kind of attached to their pale ales. But you know, the term pale came about in the late 1700s, as I said before, when they kind of shifted from just heavily roasting their malts and creating their brown style beers to these lighter style beers. And through the late 1700s and early 1800s, these more refined type of beers became widely popular. At first with sort of the upper class, because it was definitely a class separation. You know, working class drank the browns and the Scotch type ales and the maltier beers, but the upper class, they could afford and had access to these little bit more refined products that were slightly bitter and cleaner. And then because of that, they became very popular throughout their entire culture. But there's different deviations of the pale ale, of course. And so they group them into these the British group these into what's called standard, sessions, or ordinaries, which usually go up to about a little over 4%. Premiums, best, and special bitters, 4.5 to 4.2 to 4.7, and then extra special or strong, which is 4.8. So you can kind of see the relative nature there. I would say today's American beer drinker would consider 4.8 to be on the lower side, kind of what we sort of call that session beer. But the standard in the past had always been a little bit lower, a little bit lighter, a little bit easier drinking. And you drank more. And again, the British pints are bigger. Just a note down the bottom here, the Burton Pale Ale in the second half of the 19th century, the recipe for pale ale was put into use by the Burton-upon-Trent brewers, notably Bass. Their thing is that their water is different in there because they have gypsum that is part of the stone that the water runs over, and so it has a different kind of feel to it. And actually, in the chemistry of the beer production, it has a different style to it. And it really was their own signature for many, many years, and then someone kind of figured out how to filter the water and sort of copy that. But basically, Bass was a singular style for many years. You hardly see it anymore these days. I think it's kind of gotten lost, certainly behind a lot of American craft beer. But it's a really nice style of beer. It's just easy. It's just not what we're used to as Americans these days. It is one of those elements, like I said, though, that gave me inspiration from a stylistic point of view when we were creating Brutus. Pale Ale American, and I put Sierra Nevada up here, but down at the bottom, I also put commercial examples of Brutus, because Brutus not only took its inspiration in my mind from Bass, but also from Sierra Nevada, which was really the first classic American Pale Ale. And what defines an American Pale Ale is essentially taking that base of English Pale Ale and adding a little bit more hops, giving it a little bit more color, a little bit more maltiness, and the American hop varieties of Centennial and Cascade hops would have been, are almost always going to be pretty common in these beers. And so you end up with this little bit more malt, a little bit more aromatics, particularly on the nose from the Cascade hops, and then a little bit more bitter finish on the back. And so it's Americanized. It just has a little bit more intensity to it. And the IBUs are up around 30 to 45. I would say these days, most American pale ales are a little bit on the higher side of that. I think Brutus actually is just slightly higher than that, if I recall, maybe around 50, something like that, 52. And the alcohol tends to be a little bit higher than those English pales, ranging from about 4.5 to 6.2. I know in a lot of menus, and I think it comes from the fact that Beer Advisor or one of the websites says that Brutus is 6 or 6.2% alcohol. It's not. It's actually 5% alcohol. And I've gone back to the brewery and checked on that with them. So despite what it might say out there, Brutus is actually pretty much in the session category range. Low to moderate maltiness supports the hop presentation and may optionally show a small amount of specialty malt character, bread, toast, biscuits. I think it's important to understand that a lot of these beers, especially Brutus, have a mix of malts. We use 4 or 5 different kinds of malts to layer the flavoring in and the style and the mouthfeel in with Brutus, and that's the same with a lot of these producers that make these pale ales. And because it is an ale, you get a lot of fruitiness. You also get a lot of fruitiness from the hoppiness, and you also get some piney resin and sometimes grapefruit. It depends on the hops that are being used, but a lot of times Sierra Nevada and Brutus and other sort of what I would consider to be sort of classic American pale ales really rely on Centennial and Cascade hops for their main hop production. When you step up to those IPAs that are using Mosaic and Citra hops and all the other things that are out there, Amarillas, those are when you get the real super fruity, super intense grapefruit and citrus and stuff. So other examples would be, besides Brutus and Sierra, would be Stone Pale, Bear Republic XP, which comes from California, Anderson's Palico Gold, Pale Ale Full Sail, which we can sometimes get here, Firestone, which is great, Left Hand's Jackman Pale Ale. So there's some really great pales out there. I think they get overshadowed a little bit because they're not New England style, cloudy, hazy IPAs. They're not, super hopped up, super high in alcohol. But I think it's actually more, I've seen the beer world brewers shift a little bit back towards what I would kind of consider to be regular pale ales. They kind of list them more as their session IPA or session ales or session IPAs, just a little toned down, a little lower in alcohol. So, but this is definitely the place that I like to drink beers in. Maine's Lunch is a very classic pale ale that we get. If you want a delicious version of a pale ale, get a bottle of Maine Lunch. And then red ale. So this is a fun category, and it's like you never see it, but Casco Bay Riptide Red is actually the third part of that sort of palate inspiration that I keep talking about with Brutus. So Bass kind of setting the stage for the very structure and style of Brutus. Sierra Nevada giving inspiration to Americanize it, and then Casco Bay. If you look at Brutus, you'll see that it's a little darker. It's not quite, pale, kind of golden pale. It's actually a little bit more red, amber kind of gold, pale ale. And it's because Casco Bay Riptide, which I don't even know if it's made anymore, but this is from Maine, and it's a delicious style of beer that I used to have when I went up to Maine for vacation and whatnot. I'd buy it by the case and bring it back with me because it wasn't available down here. But there's other examples like the Wisconsin red pale ale out there, and red ales actually are kind of more common because of their Irish heritage. So I hate to say it, but Killian's Red, which is not really a red ale, kind of plays off of that, but it's a lager. It's kind of a lousy lager, but they're fine. There are some interesting producers out there that don't make this red ale. We don't see it very often, but it's a nice style. It's just a fuller bodied, more malty type of pale ale. Like it says right here, there's some questions to whether or not it's actually its own style or not. But it is a deeper kind of rich color to it typically. The aroma is low to moderate malt, might have a little buttery character, and a low hop aroma because they're not putting a lot of hops in here. Appearance, more amber and reddish and copper in color, moderate caramel malt flavors, easy drinking, a little bit dry finish, and then on the mouth, again, it kind of follows suit because you have that medium. It's medium light, medium body, a little bit lower in alcohol, not too bitter because it doesn't have, I mean, you look at the IBUs, it's 17 and 28 down here, and alcohol between 4 and 6. That's kind of where I wanted alcohol-wise for Brutus, was right around 5. I definitely wanted the bitterness to be up a little bit higher because of the hops, but I wanted that kind of nice soft maltiness, almost like a British mild or just regular bitters, which is kind of where it is. So easy drinking pint, malt focus with initial sweetness and a roasted dryness on the finish. Just a nice easy drinking beer, good session beer. That's why I used to drink it when I went up to Maine in the summertime on vacation. And then you can see the color here in this example. In the US, red ales, basically a variation of the English pale, has a notable dash of roasted barley, which is where it gets its color. It's again, I don't want to kill this, but it's just a nice kind of easy drinking style of beer. Smithwick's Irish, Murphy's Irish Red, Sam Adams Irish Red, Star Hill Amber, Carl Strauss's Red Trolley. Trying to find one here. Thomas Hooker Irish Style Red Ale. They do make that once in a while, usually just in the spring for St. Patty's Day. And then I added Casco Bay Red on the bottom there. And as I said, interestingly, a few beers in the market are labeled Irish Red or brewed as lagers. That's actually just a snub at Killian's, essentially, which is a Coors company. All right, so how do we taste pale ales? Well, it's like we taste anything else. These are they range the gamut, as we talked about. They've got great flavors. You just have to kind of focus down. And I think going back to what I just talked about with the 3 different sort of dominant country origins is going to give you a little bit of a clue. English ales are going to focus on that little bit of maltiness, reserved hoppiness, and tend to be more refreshing and sessionable. American pales, these are going to be a little bit more bold, a little bit more in your face with malt and with hops. When you put your nose in the glass of a pint of American pale ale, you should smell hops. You should smell some grapefruit and some resin and some herbaceousness. And as it hits your palate, it's going to be clean though. It's not going to be overly malty or sweet. And then it's going to finish almost with a little dryness. And then an echo of that hop aromatics should come through, because a lot of times what producers are doing is they're going to add bittering components with hops to them, like pellets, into the boil, and then they're going to add some aromatic type hops at the end of the boil, some fresh hops, so that they get more of that flavor and aromatics to them. Not intense like an IPA, but approaching that. And that's exactly like with Brutus and whatnot, I think, how I like to describe it. And I kind of describe hops as kind of being like the acidity and the flavor aromatics that you might find in wine, because they do provide that little bitterness against the maltiness that you're going to have in an American pale ale. The Belgian pales are very clean. just slightly bitter, pretty gassy and foamy, and they make for an extremely delicious, easy drinking, subtle style of beer. So just like everything else, you want to look at it, you want to smell it, you want to taste it, savor it, pair it up with some food, which is, oh, we did one on serving here. So pale ales are best served slightly warmer. Unfortunately, you're not going to really get that because all the beers are going to come out of our coolers at the same temperature, which is usually around 38 to 40 degrees. But in a big pint glass, it gives them a chance to warm up just a little bit, and that's going to allow the fruit esters and the flavors to kind of come out a little bit more, which I think actually is great for pale ales. The hoppier the beer, the warmer you want, because then that allows the hop flavors to come out better. For glassware, we typically use the standard pint. Sometimes we do have modified footed glassware, such as the goblets, but it's still a wide mouth and a style of glass that allows a lot of the aromatics to come out. The pale ales typically, I think, are for the most part price-wise and service-wise are going to do best in the standard pint. Belgian ales, though, definitely should go into the tulip. And when you pour these, we watched a video a week or two ago about how to pour beer, but you want to pour the beer, starting down the side of the glass, 45-degree angle with the glass, let it run down until you get about half full, and then you want to pour it off for the rest of the glass, straight down into the beer, kind of allowing a nice, beautiful foamy head to form on top of the beer, which as the bubbles explode is going to allow the aromatics from the beer to come out and hit your nose. So just like any beer, you want foam. Unlike this picture right here where the foam is falling down. So pale ales and food, because there's such a wide range of beer in this category, they go with a wide range of foods. British pale ales can be enjoyed with pump foods, as well as Indian and Asian. I think the key is the less hops, the easier it goes with spicy things. The more hops, stay away from spicy things. I know that's hard because if you go to Max Burger or something, you get people drinking, extremely hoppy beers and maybe having something with barbecue sauce on it or some other spice on it. What's going to end up happening is the heat in the chili or whatever creates the heat in the food is actually going to magnify the heat in the bitterness in the hops. And it's not often the best combination. So actually drinking one of the lighter pale ales, like the Golden or the Ambers that are a little maltier or less hoppy, if you're having barbecue or you're having some hot wings or something like that, is actually going to be a better choice because it's going to help kind of just cool the heat rather than sort of magnify that a little bit. So hoppier beers go great with grilled meats, salads, roasted chicken, regular burgers, and a lot of different kinds of food. They're great. Drink them all the time. A lot of people have them. Easy. All right, come on, escape. Any questions? No questions. Okay, so I'm just going to show a quick video. I gotta log this one out. Oop, get off of that. All right, let's restart this. So this is really, it's actually a Wall Street Journal video. And it's a few years old, but it's Talk Smart About Beer. And it's kind of a good all-around beer. It's a little simple, but it's not too bad. So we're just give it a view here. It's about 5 minutes long, and we'll get through it. Just turn the volume down for half a second.
Welcome to WSJ Off Duty. I'm Wendy Bounce, and today I have the very important and immensely difficult task of learning how to talk smart about beer. You know what? Somebody's got to do it, guys. All right, and I have the man to do it. His name is Mark Schmeda. He's the chief brewer at Chelsea Brewing Company here in New York City. Now, you got a rainbow of beers out here. We're going to start from sort of, light to dark? How did you set them up here?
Least flavorful to most flavorful, intensity-wise.
All right, so I would always be gravitating just by instinct to the lightest beer because I think it would be sort of the one that would taste best to me. I could be wrong. What's this first one?
This one is called Checker Can Blonde Ale. It's a Kolsch style beer, and by Kolsch it means it originated in Cologne, Germany, Cologne. It's very light and lager-like beer, so this appeals to the masses. It accounts for about 60% of our sales.
And if I'm going to say something smart about its taste when I drink it, because I don't sound smart, what would I say?
Taste it. Let me know what you think.
E equals MC squared. I'm just kidding.
I think it comes across as very light, very crisp and clean.
And this doesn't taste, and I don't mean this as an insult, it doesn't taste too dramatically different from what I would be accustomed to drinking
Right.
something out of a bottle.
And that is where, German heritage comes in, because most of the beers that we have in the U.S. have a German heritage.
Okay.
To a German style.
Not too different color, but a little, I mean, I can see a little more murkiness to it. It's not quite as clear.
Hazy.
Hazy.
This beer is filtered. This beer is not filtered, but it's also a wheat beer.
It's a wheat beer.
Wheat contributes a lot of haze to the product, and we like that haze. It really signifies what a good wheat beer looks like. 60% wheat
60%.
in that beer, where this is 100% barley malt.
Different flavor though.
Different
It's a
flavor.
little stronger, a little more intense than the other
A
one.
little bit grainy.
Yeah, a little grainy. That's grainy. That's the word I remember. Grainy.
So that's an American style wheat beer,
Okay.
not to be confused with Bavarian wheat, which use a different yeast, and that yeast gives them a banana clove ester,
Okay.
which is, a lot of people relate to spiciness. That's Sunset Red and amber ale, American amber ale. You should be able to smell like hops in there. It should be becoming a little more floral and a little more bitter.
So this is definitely more bitter. So
Right.
there are more hops in this one.
More hops,
Okay.
and there's also a lot more caramel malt, which gives it that red color. And caramel malts add a little bit of sweetness to the beer, and then the hops counter that sweetness, the bitterness of the hops. Hops are like the spice of beer. This one's a rye beer. Rye malt is used in place of the barley in a certain percentage. Rye malt is spicy and sometimes considered a little bit sour. I don't know if you drink rye whiskey, but rye
Yes.
whiskey is different than,
Then absolutely.
than
Yep.
grain,
And
than
bourbon
regular
or
wheat grain
anything, right.
whiskey. So you should get a little spiciness.
See, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have necessarily gravitated. I would have been scared of it. So what's it
Right.
called again?
That's called red hop
Red
rye.
hop.
It's hoppy. It's hopped like an IPA, which we're going to get to next.
But it's the basic style is a rye.
Right.
Okay, got you. Very good. All right.
This one is India Pale Ale, Hop Angel India Pale Ale, IPA. Lots of hops in there, so you get a good hop bitterness.
Not
and-
quite the same like burst of flavor
Right.
as in the rye, but good,
There's-
easy.
Right, there's less specialty malts in this.
Right.
There's one malt in there called honey malt and some Cara Pils malt. But basically, if you see color-wise,
Yeah.
it's not that much different from
No.
the light beers, but it's definitely more intense hop-wise than any of these beers.
And now we're getting this is what I would call the manly beers, but I would probably be
Um,
sexist.
Yeah, a lot of women, I found a lot of women at beer shows gravitate to
They
stouts.
do.
Uh,
And this
especially,
one is a stout right here.
no, this
this
one is the porter.
Porter, and this is stout.
Right. The porter, and we don't have a good light in here, but the porters are usually, if you hold up the sunlight, they're translucent. They're not opaque like a stout. And
I don't
they're,
know. I'm not seeing through this.
yeah, oh, no
No
sun
sun. That's
today.
not a problem. And all right, this is the porter.
That's the porter, so it's slightly
It's like
roasty.
coffee. It's like coffee.
Yeah, slightly roasty, but then when you get to the next one,
It's
you'll
really
say it's a
good.
lot like coffee.
And this is
That's the
stout.
stout. That's
It's like
the
Guinness.
Black Hole Triple X Stout. It's like a double Guinness. And that
That's a
one's
meal.
very coffee and chocolatey, dark chocolate and coffee.
Cheers. So we're back here in your brew house. I mean, this is where the witchcraft is performed.
This is it.
I mean, these are the basic ingredients of beer.
That's all you need. 4 ingredients: malted barley, hops, yeast, and water.
No wonder so many people try it at home.
That's right.
Now, which of these do you think I'm going to choose to finish? I may surprise you.
I thought you'd take the rye.
You thought I'd take the rye. I thought I would take the rye until I tasted the porter.
Oh, really?
All right, so you guys come back to me in about 10 minutes and see how I'm doing. Cheers. You
Right.
pick one.
I'm gonna pick the stout.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Go away now. I'm working.
All right, so just a little quick roundup there on beer styles and kind of go through them in a progression. We're obviously not tasting things right now, but if and when we get back to tasting, we taste side by side. It's really important to be able to kind of understand the differences in these beers, and that gets more clear when you can taste them side by side, just like anything else. So I don't see any questions at the moment. That was about all I had today, so slightly shorter than normal. But hopefully you got an understanding of the lighter or milder side of pale ales. Tomorrow what we'll do is we'll kind of wrap up the ale categories with the IPAs and the porters and stouts. And then Friday we'll kind of touch on sort of the oddball categories that are out there a little bit. But that's about all I got for now. So otherwise, I'm going to sign off and say thanks, and I'll see you tomorrow. Cheers, guys.
See you tomorrow, Bryce. Thank you.
Thank you.